Growing up in the 1990s, Britain meant being part of the last generation to truly live before the digital age consumed everything. We straddled two worlds, analog childhoods with digital adolescence. But here's the twist. We weren't just lucky, we actively chose when to engage with technology, making us the only generation with genuine digital autonomy. What you're about to discover is archaeological evidence of humanity's last stand before total connectivity, preserved in Britpop, Tamagotchis, and dial-up sounds. Remember Sunday evenings, hunched over your stereo system with a blank TDK cassette, finger poised over the record button like a sniper waiting for the perfect shot? The UK Top 40 with Mark Goodyear wasn't just a radio show. It was a 3-hour endurance test of patience, timing, and sheer bloody determination. You'd spend the entire countdown praying your favourite song would climb high enough to get played, only to have Bruno Brooks talk over the intro, or worse, cut to the news just as the guitar solo kicked in. The real skill was mastering the pause record technique, that split-second timing needed to avoid capturing the DJ's voice whilst maximising song length. We developed lightning-fast reactions, all for a mixtape that would inevitably get chewed up by someone's car stereo within a month. Those home-recorded mixtapes from the 1990s are now considered cultural artifacts, containing radio jingles, DJ banter, and chart rundowns that exist nowhere else. The controversial bit: despite the music industry's "home taping is killing music" campaign, cassette culture actually helped artists build fan bases, with mixtapes introducing millions to new bands they'd later buy albums from. Speaking of uninterrupted experiences, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, smash that subscribe button right now. Because later I'm revealing the one 90s playground game that was actually banned by Parliament. And trust me, you definitely played it. Saturday mornings in 90s, Britain had a schedule more rigid than military operations. You'd wake at 7 a.m. sharp for TV Live watching Ant and Dec when they were still PJ and Duncan, through to Dick and Dom's absolute chaos on Live and Kicking. The dedication was real. No pause button, no catch-up, no toilet breaks during Pokemon. Miss it, and you'd spend Monday morning at school completely lost when everyone discussed Wonky Donkey or the latest Challenge Ant contestant who'd eaten something horrific. What made this era special wasn't just the shows, but the interactive element. We'd phone in, on the landline obviously, trying to win competitions, with that distinctive engaged tone becoming the soundtrack to crushed dreams. The phone lines were constantly jammed on Saturday mornings, with thousands of kids simultaneously trying to get through. Here's the bizarre truth. Children's TV presenters from this era have become cult figures, with university students now studying the parasocial relationships these shows created. The hidden truth? CBBC and CITV were locked in such fierce competition that they deliberately schedule their best content at identical times, forcing families to choose sides like some bizarre television civil war. The trip to Blockbuster was a social event that today's Netflix generation simply cannot comprehend. You'd spend 45 minutes wandering those blue-carpeted aisles, reading the backs of VHS cases like they were sacred texts, negotiating with siblings over whether to rent The Matrix for the 8th time or risk it on something new. The smell of plastic cases and popcorn, the disappointment of finding all copies of the new release gone, the pure joy of discovering that one film you'd been hunting for months. Late fees were the bane of our existence. Blockbuster made an absolute fortune from late fees, which formed a massive chunk of their total revenue. The most controversial aspect: former employees now reveal that stores would deliberately understock popular new releases to keep them in circulation longer, knowing customers would keep films extra days whilst waiting. But here's the beautiful bit. Those forced waits and limited choices meant we actually watched everything we rented. No endless scrolling, no starting 17 things and finishing none. We committed to our terrible choices and watched Jean-Claude Van Damme's entire filmography with pride. When CD burners arrived around 1997, we thought we'd reached the pinnacle of technology. Creating the perfect mix CD was an art form that required a 700 megabyte canvas, Nero burning ROM, and approximately 6 hours per disc. You'd carefully curate 19 tracks, never 20, always leave them wanting more. Design elaborate covers in Microsoft Paint and write track listings in your best handwriting with a specially purchased CD pen. The forgotten trauma nobody mentions. The coaster graveyard, that pile of failed burns because someone opened a door, causing a microscopic vibration that ruined everything at 98% completion. British households went through stacks of ruined CDRs, creating mountains of shiny drink coasters. The underground economy of mixed CDs in British schools was legendary, with certain students becoming famous for their themed compilations. One lad from Birmingham reportedly funded his entire university education selling revision mix CDs that supposedly contained subliminal learning frequencies, but were actually just, now that's what I call music albums. MSN Messenger and the art of digital drama. MSN Messenger wasn't just an app, it was a Shakespearean theatre of teenage emotion. Your screen name was a carefully crafted piece of poetry, usually featuring unnecessary X's and references to Good Charlotte lyrics. Charlotte Says School Sucks wasn't just a status update. It was a cry for attention that would spark 40-minute conversations about absolutely nothing. The nudge feature was essentially a digital slap, and everyone had that one friend who'd spam it until your entire monitor shook like you were experiencing an earthquake. Custom emoticons were currency, and having the dancing banana meant you were basically royalty. The real psychological warfare was appearing offline while stalking everyone's status updates, or the ultimate power move, signing in and immediately setting yourself to busy to seem important. This wasn't just console rivalry, this was tribal warfare that divided friendships, families, and entire council estates. PlayStation kids had Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, looking down on Nintendo 64 owners like they were still playing with Fisher-Price toys. Meanwhile, 64 disciples had GoldenEye and Mario Kart 64, hosting legendary 4-player sessions that would last until someone's mum threatened to unplug everything. The split-screen multiplayer experience created a unique social dynamic. Screen looking was a criminal offence punishable by dead arms, and everyone had elaborate theories about which controller port gave you an advantage. British gaming magazines of the era were basically propaganda machines, with official PlayStation magazine and N64 magazine conducting a Cold War through passive-aggressive editors' letters. The playground rumours about each console were legendary. Stories about memory cards getting viruses or consoles overheating spread like wildfire, though most were complete nonsense invented by kids who couldn't afford both systems. Before we dive into the next controversial 90s truth, hit that like button if you ever blew into a game cartridge thinking it would fix it, and stick around because I'm about to reveal why your parents were secretly relieved when Tamagotchis died. When texting arrived, we became poets of necessity. With 160 characters and 10 pence per message, every text was crafted with the precision of a haiku. We developed an entire language. CUL8R wasn't laziness, it was economic efficiency. Predictive text turned simple messages into comedy gold, with home becoming good, and nobody ever successfully typing book on the first attempt. The true art was text flirting with exactly the right amount of mystery. Too many kisses seemed desperate, too few seemed cold. The typing and deleting, the agonizing wait for a reply, the panic when you accidentally sent something to your mum meant for your mate. Text messaging exploded in the late 90s, with British teenagers leading the world in SMS usage. Phone companies made billions from texts that cost virtually nothing to transmit. One of the most profitable services in telecommunications history. Before Google, we had CFAX page 302 for football scores and Teletext holidays for cheap breaks to Magaluf. Watching those pages slowly load, line by pixelated line, was meditation for the impatient. You'd memorize page numbers like phone numbers, 140 for news headlines, 160 for weather, 440 for TV listings. The bizarre Bamboozle quiz on Channel 4's Teletext became a cult phenomenon, with its purposely impossible questions and sarcastic wrong answers. The creator made it deliberately frustrating as a social experiment in human persistence. The most useful feature was page 888 for subtitles, revolutionary for deaf viewers, but also the secret weapon for watching late-night films without waking your parents. The Woolworths Pick and Mix wall was where children learned about economics, self-control, and density physics. You'd develop complex strategies, heavy sweets at the bottom, light ones on top, crushing everything down to maximize your paper bag's capacity. The curved top technique, where you'd create a dome of sweets rising above the bag's rim, required engineering skills that would make Brunel proud. The unwritten rules were sacred. No eating whilst filling, no mixing chocolate with fizzy sweets, and absolutely no putting expensive fudge in your bag if your mum was paying. Shop workers now admit they were instructed to watch for overloading, as kids were masters at compressing sweets. The pick and mix was hugely profitable for Woolworths, becoming one of their signature features. The controversial truth? Those fresh sweets could sit in bins for months, preserved by industrial quantities of sugar and additives. School discos were basically Lord of the Flies with a DJ. Boys on one side, girls on the other, with a demilitarized zone in the middle where only the brave or foolish dared venture. When Angels by Robbie Williams came on, the slow dance panic was real. Palms sweating, maintaining that awkward arm's-length distance mandated by hovering teachers, praying the song would end before anyone noticed your complete lack of rhythm. The DJ was invariably someone's dad with a hi-fi separate system and 2 CD decks, playing the same 40 songs at every disco for 6 years. The buffet consisted entirely of cheese and pineapple on sticks and bowls of hula hoops, with orange squash so diluted it was basically homeopathic. The lasting memory? That one kid who'd always request Cotton Eye Joe and turn the dance floor into a war zone of flailing limbs and scattered chips. The Argos catalogue was 1,500 pages of dreams, arriving twice yearly like some retail Bible. The laminated book of dreams became our Amazon, except you had to write item numbers on tiny paper with tiny pencils like you were filling out a betting slip. Elizabeth Duke jewellery was where every teenage boy panic-bought sovereign rings and clown pendants for girlfriends. Kids would spend hours circling everything they wanted for Christmas with different coloured pens indicating priority levels. The catalogue had its own gravitational pull in British homes, usually living beside the toilet where it served dual purposes. What's remarkable is that Argos processed orders with incredible accuracy, using just handwritten numbers. No computers, just human interpretation of terrible handwriting on tiny pieces of paper. The playground economy of the 90s was more complex than the FTSE 100. Pogs weren't just milk cap decorations, they were currency, status symbols, and weapons of psychological warfare. Your slammer collection defined your social standing. Metal slammers were mid-tier, but if you had a saw blade or holographic skull, you were basically playground royalty. Pokemon cards created Britain's first generation of child entrepreneurs. Kids developed sophisticated trading algorithms, with Charizard exchange rates fluctuating based on supply, demand, and whether Jason's older brother was selling his collection. The shiny Charizard was worth approximately 150 regular cards or 3 PlayStation games in the barter economy. Teachers confiscated cards worth thousands of pounds today, probably sitting on gold mines in their attics. The dark truth? Card rarity was carefully controlled, with certain cards printed in tiny quantities to maintain the collecting frenzy. That screech-static Boeing symphony of dial-up connecting was the opening ceremony for 2 hours of internet before someone needed the phone. You'd strategically plan your internet sessions like military operations, downloading everything possible before your allocated time ended. A single song took 20 minutes, assuming nobody picked up the phone extension and severed your connection with their primitive desire for voice communication. Waiting for photos to load line by line turned us into amateur psychics, trying to guess what the image was from just the top pixels. Internet bills were astronomical, with households paying premium rates for painfully slow connections and limited monthly hours. The most controversial aspect? Phone companies deliberately maintained slow speeds to maximize connection time charges, creating artificial scarcity that shaped Britain's digital divide for years. Tamagotchis weren't pets. They were needy digital overlords that controlled our lives through guilt and repetitive beeping. Teachers banned them, parents hated them, but we loved these demanding keychain sociopaths. The genuine trauma of coming home from school to find your Tamagotchi surrounded by poo and gravestone symbols was our generation's first experience with grief and personal responsibility. The black market for Tamagotchi sitting during school hours was real, with entrepreneurial kids charging 50 pence per day to keep your digital pet alive during lessons. Some schools created Tamagotchi daycare centers, basically acknowledging defeat. The fascinating aspect is that Tamagotchis were originally designed as a commentary on Japanese work culture, but British kids turned them into status symbols worth more than actual pets. Parents and teachers worried these toys were teaching children that death was easily reversible with fresh batteries. On the paper round was our introduction to the gig economy, except with more dog attacks and absolutely no workers' rights. You'd wake at 5:30 a.m, cycle through horizontal rain delivering Sunday Times supplements that weighed more than you did, all for £12 a week. But that £12 was fortune when a Freddos cost 10 pence, and you could get bladdered on a tenner. The territorial nature of paper rounds created turf wars that would make the wire look tame. Stealing another kid's round was declaration of war, settled through bike races or playground justice. Newsagents operated like feudal lords with waiting lists for the good rounds, posh estates with Christmas tips, whilst rookies got council flats with broken lifts and aggressive Jack Russells. The hidden economics. Paper rounds were one of the biggest employers of children in Britain, creating an entire underground cash economy. 12 CDs for £1 seemed too good to be true because it absolutely was. Britannia Music Club was basically a legal pyramid scheme that trapped half of Britain's teenagers in contracts more binding than mortgages. You'd forget to send back the monthly selection card and suddenly own Phil Collins' greatest hits and an Enya album you'd never escape. The small print was written by lawyers who'd clearly sold their souls, requiring you to buy 8 full-price CDs over 2 years at £16.99 each. Missing payments resulted in threatening letters that made bailiff notices look friendly. The genius, evil, was that they'd send you music just different enough from what you wanted that you couldn't return it, but couldn't enjoy it either. Former employees now admit the company made most of their profits from unwanted automatic shipments and administrative fees rather than actual music sales. Theme tunes from 90s Britain weren't just introductions, they were cultural education. Every British person can still sing the Funhouse theme, complete with Pat Sharp's mullet dance moves burned into memory. 2.4 children taught us what middle-class aspiration looked like, whilst men behaving badly prepared us for disappointing flatmates. The Gladiators theme tune could get your blood pumping instantly, whilst the Crystal Maze theme was basically ambient music for the stressed. These weren't just songs, but social glue. Humming the Biker Grove theme instantly revealed your age and background like some audio fingerprint. The BBC invested heavily in memorable theme music, with composers earning substantial royalties from these iconic tunes. The secret nobody talks about? Theme tunes were deliberately crafted to be earworms, using similar psychological techniques to advertising jingles to ensure they'd stick in your head forever. British playgrounds in the 90s were asphalt thunderdomes where health and safety went to die. British Bulldog was banned by countless schools due to injury concerns, but we played it anyway, usually resulting in torn uniforms and scraped knees that we'd walk off. Kirby required precision ball control and traffic awareness, turning suburban streets into Wembley Stadium. Kiss Chase was basically sanctioned chaos that somehow seemed normal, whilst 40-40 combined hide and seek with prison breaks. These games required no equipment beyond imagination and acceptance that someone would definitely cry. The beautiful truth? Child psychologists now recognise that these risky games developed crucial skills like risk assessment and resilience. The controversial bit? After schools banned these traditional games, playground injuries initially dropped, but childhood obesity rates began climbing, suggesting that active play, even with occasional bumps, was healthier than sedentary alternatives. The 90s British childhood was messy, inefficient, occasionally dangerous, and absolutely magical. We didn't document every moment because we were too busy living them. Our mistakes weren't screenshot and shared, they evaporated into memory. Today's kids will never know the anticipation of waiting, the joy of discovery without spoilers, or the freedom of being unreachable. We lived in the sweet spot, advanced enough for comfort, primitive enough for adventure. If this hit you right in the nostalgia, subscribe now. Share this with that mate who still has their original Tamagotchi.